Kindness doesn't ask for recognition. It whispers in the small moments, the quiet choices we make when no one is watching. In the bustling downtown of Westridge, where skyscrapers cast long shadows and people rush by without meeting each other's eyes, one woman's simple act of compassion was about to change, not just her life, but the heart of an entire community. What she didn't know was that sometimes the universe has a way of returning kindness tenfold, often through the most unexpected messengers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Stay with us. This isn't just a story about a chance encounter. It's about seeing beyond appearances, about the courage to be generous when the world tells you to look away, and about how ripples of goodness can become waves of transformation. If you believe that authentic kindness still has power in this cynical world, we invite you to join Authentic Lives, where every story reminds us that the human spirit is still capable of beautiful surprises. The morning rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets of Westridge glistening under weak autumn sunshine. Raindrops clung to the awning of Miller's diner, catching light like tiny prisms as they fell one by one onto the cracked sidewalk below. Inside, warmth fogged the windows, mingling with the scent of coffee and the comforting sizzle of the grill. Rebecca Morgan wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, her movements quick but thorough as she prepared for the morning rush. At 32, her honey-brown hair was already threaded with strands of silver that she never bothered to hide. Life had carved fine lines around her eyes, not from age, but from years of worry, of making difficult choices, of raising her younger brother alone after their parents' accident 7 years ago. The diner was Rebecca's second home, a place where the worn vinyl booths and chipped ceramic mugs felt more familiar than her own apartment sometimes. She'd been working here for nearly 9 years, watching the neighborhood transform around Miller's unchanged interior. Old family businesses had shuttered, replaced by sleek coffee chains and boutiques with names she could never quite pronounce. But Miller's remained, stubborn and unapologetic, like a boulder in a changing stream. "Order up, Rebecca," called Carlo from the kitchen, his voice rough from years of early mornings. The cook had been here longer than anyone, his skilled hands, having prepared countless meals through economic booms and busts. He taught Rebecca everything she knew about surviving tough times, with dignity intact. She grabbed the plates, balancing them along her arm with the skill that came from years of practice. "Thanks, Carlo. The Henderson family's in booth 6. They're asking if you're ever going to share that pancake recipe." Carlo's laugh rolled out from behind the grill. "When pigs fly, Becca, when pigs fly." Rebecca smiled as she delivered the steaming plates to the Henderson family, weekend regulars whose daughter had just started college. Mrs. Henderson reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We miss seeing Emma. How's she doing at State?" "Loving her classes, hating the dorm food," Rebecca replied, warmth spreading through her chest. This was what made the long hours and aching feet worthwhile. These small connections, this sense of community that survived despite the impersonal city growing around them. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Rebecca's attention away. Her smile faltered slightly as a man shuffled in, his appearance immediately setting him apart from the usual clientele. He wore several layers of mismatched clothes, all bearing the marks of hard living. His beard was untrimmed, his face weathered by sun and wind. The backpack he carried looked worn to threads, patched in multiple places with what appeared to be electrical tape. Rebecca noticed how the other customers subtly shifted away, their conversations dropping to whispers. Mr. Finch, a banker who came in every morning for his black coffee and wheat toast, clutched his newspaper tighter, eyes narrowing over the business section. The man made his way to the counter, choosing the stool farthest from other customers. He kept his eyes down, shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable. Rebecca recognized that posture, the attempt to be invisible. When you know you're unwelcome. She'd seen it on her brother's face during those difficult years after their parents died, when they'd nearly lost everything. She approached him with the same smile she offered every customer, setting down a menu and pouring a cup of coffee without being asked. "Morning," she said warmly. "Coffee's fresh. Take your time with the menu. I'll be back to take your order when you're ready." The man looked up, surprise flickering across his face. His eyes were a startling blue against his weathered skin, alert and clear despite his disheveled appearance. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft but articulate. Rebecca moved away, giving him space. She could feel Mr. Finch's disapproving stare boring into her back, could hear Mrs. Ellison at table 3 whispering loudly about standards and the neighborhood going downhill. But Rebecca continued her work, refilling coffees and taking orders, occasionally glancing toward the quiet man who now studied the menu with intense concentration. When she returned to take his order, he didn't look up immediately. "Just the coffee is fine," he said, pushing the menu away slightly. His fingers were clean but calloused, with what looked like ink stains around the nails. Rebecca tilted her head. "You sure? The breakfast special's good value today. Eggs, bacon, hash browns and toast for $7.99. The man's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Just coffee today, thank you." Rebecca had been a waitress long enough to recognize the calculations happening behind those blue eyes, the mental tallying of limited funds, the weighing of hunger against necessity. She'd done those same calculations herself too many times. "I'll be right back," she said, moving toward the kitchen before he could respond. She approached Carlo at the grill, lowering her voice. "Carlo, can I get a breakfast special for the guy at the counter? Put it on my tab." Carlo glanced past her shoulder, then back to her face. His expression softened. "Your tab's getting pretty long this month, Becca." She shrugged. "Mark said the plumbing in my apartment won't be fixed until next week. I'm still eating most meals here anyway." Carlo studied her for a moment, then shook his head with a small smile. "No tab, this one's on me, but don't make a habit of it." "You say that every time," Rebecca grinned, squeezing his flour-dusted hand gratefully. When she returned to the counter, the man was staring into his coffee cup as if it held answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. Rebecca set down extra cream and sugar beside him, noting how he startled slightly at her approach. "Food'll be up in a few minutes," she said casually. His brow furrowed. "I didn't order food." "Cook made too much," she replied with practiced ease. "It'll just go to waste. Otherwise," the man wasn't fooled. His eyes, intelligent and somehow both wary and kind, studied her face. "You don't have to do that." "I'm not doing anything," Rebecca insisted, busying herself with wiping down the counter. "Except my job, which is making sure customers get what they need." For a moment, tension hung between them. Then something shifted in the man's expression. Not quite a smile, but a loosening, an acceptance. He nodded once. "Thank you." Rebecca continued her morning routine, aware of Mr. Finch's disapproving glare and Mrs. Ellison's theatrical sigh when Carlo delivered a steaming plate to the counter. But she also noticed something else. How carefully the man ate, with a kind of deliberate gratitude that made the food seem like more than just eggs and bacon. He cut each piece methodically, chewed thoroughly, occasionally closing his eyes as if to better appreciate the flavors. It was the opposite of how most customers, distracted by phones, gulping down food between checking emails, taste secondary to convenience. There was something almost reverent about his approach that made Rebecca slow her own movements, made her suddenly aware of how rarely she actually tasted the food she served every day. As the morning rush intensified, Rebecca found herself moving between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing plates and refilling coffee cups without conscious thought. Yet she remained aware of the man at the counter, noticed how he observed the diner with quiet attention, sometimes scribbling something in a small tattered notebook he'd pulled from his pocket. When the rush finally slowed around 10 o'clock, Rebecca approached him again. His plate was empty, pushed slightly forward, and he was nursing the last of his coffee. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, already reaching for the coffee pot. He shook his head. "No, thank you. That was more than enough." He hesitated, then added, "That was kind of you." Rebecca shrugged, uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. "It's nothing. Kindness is never nothing," he replied simply. The unexpectedly profound statement caught her off guard. Before she could respond, the door chimed again, and a group of young professionals entered, bringing with them the noise and energy of the outside world. The man seemed to retreat inward at their arrival. He reached for his backpack, pulled out a worn wallet. "What do I owe for the coffee?" "It's on the house today," Rebecca said firmly. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. Reaching back into his backpack, he pulled out something wrapped in a clean but faded handkerchief. "Then please accept this. I make them myself." Curious, Rebecca accepted the small bundle. When she unwrapped it, she found a perfectly carved wooden bluebird, small enough to fit in her palm, but detailed down to the tiny feathers. It was simple but beautiful, the wood smooth and warm to the touch. "It's beautiful," she said honestly, running her finger along the delicate wing. "You made this?" The man nodded, seeming pleased by her reaction. Wood has a way of becoming what it's meant to be, if you pay attention to it. Rebecca looked from the carving to his face, seeing him differently now. Not just a homeless man, but an artisan, someone with skill and patience and vision. "Thank you, I'll keep it safe." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face, making him look younger, lighter. That's all any of us can do for the beautiful things we find. Keep them safe for a while. With that enigmatic statement, he gathered his things and stood. "I appreciate your kindness, miss, more than you know." Rebecca watched him walk toward the door, noticed how he stopped to hold it open for an elderly woman entering, how he nodded politely to her, despite her obvious hesitation at his appearance. Then he was gone, disappearing into the stream of pedestrians outside. The wooden bird felt warm in Rebecca's hand, impossibly light, yet somehow substantial. She tucked it carefully into her apron pocket, where it rested against her hip as she continued her shift, a small but tangible reminder that people were often more than they appeared to be at first glance. That evening, as Rebecca locked up the diner after the dinner rush, her mind kept returning to the homeless man and his unexpected gift. She wondered where he was now, whether he had somewhere warm to sleep, whether the breakfast she'd provided had been his only meal of the day. The thought made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. The walk home to her small apartment took 15 minutes, through streets that grew progressively less maintained. Rebecca didn't mind. The neighborhood might look rough, around the edges, but she knew most of the people here by name, like Mrs. Petrov on the second floor, who always saved Rebecca's mail when it was accidentally delivered to her, or the Santiago kids, who sometimes helped her carry groceries up the 4 flights of stairs when the elevator was broken, which was more often than not. Her apartment was small but clean, the furniture mismatched but comfortable. Photos covered. On wall, her parents on their 20th anniversary, her brother Mark's high school graduation, the two of them together on the day he'd been accepted to college. Small victories that had seemed impossible during those first dark years after their parents' accident. Rebecca set her keys on the kitchen counter and carefully removed the wooden bluebird from her pocket. She placed it on the windowsill where the morning light would catch it. Something about its simple presence made the apartment feel different, more like a home, and less like just a place to sleep between shifts. The bathroom sink was still leaking, a steady drip that punctuated the silence. Mark had promised to come by on Sunday to look at it, though they both knew his engineering studies hadn't yet covered residential plumbing. Still, it was their pattern, facing problems together, muddling through with determination, if not expertise. Rebecca changed into comfortable clothes and settled on the couch with a cup of tea and the paperback she'd been trying to finish for weeks. But her mind kept wandering back to the man at the diner, to the unexpectedly profound way he'd spoken about kindness, to the skill evident in his carving. There was a story there she couldn't quite piece together, a disconnect between his circumstances and his manner that made her curious. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Still coming for dinner tomorrow? Made too much pasta. Again." Rebecca smiled. Her brother's newfound enthusiasm for cooking had resulted in a series of ambitious but often miscalculated meals. "Wouldn't miss it," she texted back. "Need me to bring anything?" "Just yourself and maybe some antacids. Trying a new sauce recipe." Rebecca laughed out loud, the sound echoing in her empty apartment. This was their language of love, teasing and practical, but unwavering in its constancy. They'd been through too much together to need flowery expressions of affection. As she prepared for bed, Rebecca found herself wondering if the homeless man had family somewhere. People who worried about him, who missed him. The thought followed her into uneasy dreams about wooden birds that flew away and doors that wouldn't stay closed against howling winds. The next morning dawned grey and chilly, with a biting wind that hinted at the approaching winter. Rebecca wrapped her scarf tighter as she hurried toward Miller's, mentally calculating how many extra hours she'd need to pick up to cover the inevitable increase in heating costs over the coming months. The diner was quiet when she arrived, only Carlo in the kitchen preparing for the day ahead. He nodded a greeting as she hung up her coat. "Your homeless guy caused quite a stir after you left yesterday." Rebecca paused in the middle of tying her apron. "What do you mean? He came back?" Carlo cracked eggs into a large bowl, his movements never slowing as he spoke. "Not him exactly, but around 3, this fancy car pulls up, one of those sleek black ones with tinted windows that probably costs more than I'll make in a lifetime. Out steps this woman in a suit that definitely wasn't off the rack, asking for the waitress who'd been kind to a homeless man in the morning." Rebecca frowned. What did she want? "Wouldn't say exactly. Just left this for you." Carlo nodded toward a cream-colored envelope on the counter, Rebecca's name written on it in elegant script. Rebecca picked it up cautiously. The paper was thick and expensive feeling, the kind used for formal invitations. "Did she say anything else?" Carlo shrugged. "Just that you should call the number inside if you're interested." He gave her a sidelong look. "You haven't gotten yourself mixed up in anything, have you?" "Of course not," Rebecca replied, tucking the envelope into her pocket. "I just gave the guy breakfast, that's all." Carlo nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. "Well, be careful. Things that seem too good to be true usually are." Rebecca wanted to open the envelope immediately, but the morning rush began, and soon she was too busy to think about mysterious messengers or fancy cars. The envelope sat in her pocket, seemingly heavier than its actual weight, as she moved through her familiar routine of coffee refills and order-taking. By mid-morning, curiosity got the better of her. During a brief lull, Rebecca ducked into the small break room and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a simple note card bearing an address in the upscale part of downtown, a phone number and a message in the same elegant handwriting. Ms. Morgan, your kindness has not gone unnoticed. If you're interested in a potential opportunity, please call this number or visit the address below at 7 p.m. tonight. No obligation, just a conversation. Victoria Kent, Kent Foundation. Rebecca stared at the card, then pulled out her phone and searched for Kent Foundation. The results showed a well-established philanthropic organization founded by business magnate Edward Kent, focusing on community development and second chance programs for disadvantaged populations. The foundation's headquarters matched the address on the card. Her first instinct was suspicion. How did this woman know her name? Why would a prestigious foundation take an interest in a simple waitress? But beneath the wariness, curiosity flickered. What kind of opportunity could they possibly be offering? As she slipped the card back into her pocket, Rebecca noticed Mr. Finch watching her from his usual spot at the counter, his expression unreadable. She straightened her shoulders and went back to work, pushing the strange invitation to the back of her mind. Mystery or not, bills still needed paying and tables still needed serving. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks, but the card in Rebecca's pocket seemed to hum with potential, with the promise of something different. By the time her shift ended at 5:30, she had made her decision. She would go to this meeting, if only to satisfy her curiosity about the connection between a homeless man's breakfast and a prestigious foundation's interest. She had nothing to lose except a couple of hours, and something told her this was not an opportunity that would come around twice. Rebecca hurried home to shower and change, wishing she had something more impressive than her one interview outfit. Black pants slightly faded at the knees, and a blue blouse she'd found on clearance last year. Still, it was clean and neat, and she told herself that should be enough. As she prepared to leave, Rebecca's gaze fell on the wooden bluebird sitting on her windowsill. On impulse, she picked it up and tucked it into her pocket. It wasn't a lucky charm exactly, but somehow its presence comforted her, a tangible connection to the strange sequence of events that had led to this moment. The address took her to a part of the city she rarely visited, all gleaming glass towers and carefully maintained planters full of seasonal flowers. The Kent Foundation occupied the top floors of one such building, its name discreetly displayed in the lobby directory. Rebecca's heart pounded as the elevator climbed smoothly upward, carrying her away from the familiar streets and into unknown territory. She clutched the wooden bird in her pocket like a talisman, drawing courage from its solid presence. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that managed to be both elegant and welcoming, with comfortable seating and warm lighting that softened the modern lines of the furniture. A woman looked up from behind a curved desk, her smile professional but genuine. "Can I help you?" she asked. Rebecca swallowed hard. "My name is Rebecca Morgan. I was invited to meet with Victoria Kent at 7 o'clock. Recognition flashed across the receptionist's face. "Of course, Ms. Morgan. We've been expecting you. Please have a seat. Ms. Kent will be with you shortly." Rebecca sat on the edge of a sleek armchair, feeling distinctly out of place among the tasteful artwork and subtle displays of the Foundation's global work. She was just considering whether it would be worse to leave now or to go through with the increasingly intimidating meeting when a door opened and a woman emerged. She was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a simple but elegant style. Her suit was clearly expensive but not flashy, and she wore minimal jewelry, just a wedding band and small pearl earrings. But what struck Rebecca most was the woman's eyes, sharp, assessing but kind, reminding her unexpectedly of the homeless man from the diner. "Ms. Morgan," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Victoria Kent. Thank you for coming. Please, follow me." Rebecca stood, trying to hide how her knees trembled slightly. "Thank you for the invitation, though I'm still not sure why I'm here." Victoria Kent's smile deepened. "All will become clear soon enough. I promise this isn't as mysterious as it must seem." She led Rebecca through a corridor lined with photographs showing community projects, building renovations, and groups of people at various events, all bearing the Kent Foundation logo. They passed several offices before reaching a conference room with a stunning view of the city. Rebecca gasped softly as she took in the panorama of lights stretching out below them, the familiar streets of her neighborhood visible in the distance, looking oddly beautiful from this height. "Quite a perspective change, isn't it?" Victoria commented, noticing Rebecca's reaction. "Please, have a seat. Would you like coffee, tea, water?" Victoria Kent led Rebecca into a spacious conference room with windows overlooking the city skyline. The lights of Westridge glittered below them, transforming the familiar streets into a tapestry of possibility. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Victoria said, gesturing to a chair at the polished table. "I imagine you have questions." Rebecca sat, trying not to fidget under the woman's composed gaze. "A few, yes, starting with how you knew my name, and why a foundation like yours would be interested in a waitress from Miller's Diner." Victoria smiled. "Direct. I appreciate that." She took the seat across from Rebecca. "To answer your first question, James told us about you." Rebecca frowned. "James? The gentleman you served breakfast to yesterday morning?" Victoria clarified. "The one others in your diner were reluctant to welcome." Rebecca's hand instinctively went to her pocket where the wooden bird rested. "The homeless man. His name is James." Victoria's expression shifted subtly. "James Harrington, to be precise. And he's not homeless, though he certainly appeared that way yesterday." Rebecca's confusion must have shown on her face because Victoria continued, her tone gentle but matter-of-fact. "James Harrington is my employer's brother and one of the Foundation's most trusted advisors. He was conducting research for a community project we're developing in your neighborhood." The room seemed to tilt slightly as Rebecca processed this. "Information? Research? You mean he was pretending to be homeless as some kind of test?" "Not a test," Victoria corrected. "An observation. James believes that to truly understand the needs of a community, one must experience it from multiple perspectives. He's been spending time in different neighborhoods across the city, gauging reactions, assessing needs, identifying both problems and strengths." Rebecca felt a confusing mix of emotions: embarrassment at having been deceived, indignation on behalf of genuinely homeless people, and a lingering sense of being manipulated. So he was, what? Slumming, playing poverty tourist, while people who actually live on the streets suffer. Victoria's gaze remained steady. "I understand your reaction, but James's methods, while unconventional, come from genuine concern. He donates substantially to homeless services and has personally funded 3 shelters in this city. His approach may seem strange, but his intentions are sincere." Rebecca wasn't entirely convinced, but something in Victoria's tone made her hold back further judgment. "So why am I here? Because I gave him breakfast?" "Because you showed kindness when it wasn't expected or required," Victoria replied. "Because you treated him with dignity when others didn't. And because that kindness is precisely what the Kent Foundation values most in potential partners." Rebecca blinked. "Partners?" Victoria opened a folder that had been sitting on the table and pushed it toward Rebecca. Inside were photographs of a dilapidated building a few blocks from Miller's Diner, an abandoned community center that had closed due to budget cuts 5 years ago. "The Kent Foundation recently acquired this property," Victoria explained, We plan to renovate it into a multi-purpose facility, part job training center, part affordable housing, part community space. But we don't believe in imposing solutions from outside. We want someone who knows the neighborhood, who understands its needs, to help shape the project. Rebecca stared at the photos, recognizing the building immediately. It had once been a vibrant hub for the community, offering after-school programs and services for seniors. Its closure had left a void that was never filled. And you think I'm that person? Because I gave a man breakfast? Victoria leaned forward. Because you saw a person when others saw a problem. Because you have roots in that community that we lack. And because, according to our research, you've been quietly helping neighbors for years, organizing meal deliveries for the elderly during the pandemic, tutoring local kids who can't afford extra help, creating an unofficial library exchange from your apartment building's lobby. Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks. How do you know all that? We do our homework, Ms. Morgan, especially when considering potential project directors. The words hung in the air between them. Rebecca's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Project director? Me? I'm a waitress, Ms. Kent. I don't have any experience managing anything like this. Victoria's smile was understanding but firm. You've been managing more than you realize. When your parents died, you were 25 with a teenage brother to raise. You kept him in school, got him to college, all while working multiple jobs. You've organized community initiatives without funding or formal support. You understand budgeting, prioritizing needs, and working within constraints, all valuable skills for this position. Rebecca's throat felt tight. Having her life laid out so clinically by a stranger was unsettling, even if the assessment was largely accurate. Why not choose someone with actual qualifications, a social worker, or someone with a business degree? Those skills can be taught or outsourced, Victoria replied. What can't be taught is genuine connection to a community and the intuitive understanding of its needs. We have staff with advanced degrees and impressive resumes. What we need is someone who sees people clearly and cares about their welfare instinctively. Rebecca's mind whirled with possibilities and doubts. This seems too good to be true. There must be a catch. Victoria's laugh was unexpectedly warm. The catch, Ms. Morgan, is that the work will be challenging, the hours long, and the problems complex. You'll need to navigate bureaucracy, manage conflicting interests, and make difficult decisions about allocation of limited resources. The salary is fair, but not extravagant. The position requires a 3-year commitment, with evaluation periods at 6 months and annually thereafter. She slid another document across the table, a formal job description with responsibilities, expectations, and compensation details. Rebecca scanned it, her heart pounding. The salary was nearly twice what she made at the diner, with health benefits and a retirement plan. The position would require full-time commitment, meaning she'd have to leave Miller's, but the possibility made her dizzy with a mixture of excitement and terror. This is a lot to process, she said finally. Victoria nodded. Of course, we don't expect an immediate decision. Take the information home, review it, think it over. We'd like your answer within a week if possible. Rebecca closed the folder, her hands slightly unsteady. And if I say no, then we thank you for your time and continue our search, Victoria said simply. This isn't an obligation, Ms. Morgan. It's an opportunity, one we believe would benefit both you and the community you care about. But ultimately, the choice is yours. As Rebecca prepared to leave, Victoria handed her a business card. My direct line is on there. Call anytime if you have questions or concerns. And regardless of your decision, thank you for reminding us all that kindness matters, especially when directed toward those society finds easiest to ignore. Rebecca nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She tucked the folder and card into her bag and made her way back to the elevator, her mind a tumult of conflicting thoughts. The evening air felt sharp against her flushed cheeks as she emerged from the building. She decided to walk home rather than take the bus, needing time and space to process what had just happened. The city lights blurred around her as she moved through streets that suddenly seemed full of new possibility. By the time she reached her apartment, Rebecca's thoughts had settled into a pattern of cautious excitement tempered by practical concerns. She spread the Kent Foundation materials across her kitchen table and read through everything carefully, making notes, listing questions, trying to imagine herself in this new role. The wooden bluebird watched from the windowsill, its carved features catching the lamplight. Rebecca picked it up, running her finger along its smooth back. "What would you do?" she asked it softly, feeling slightly foolish but needing to externalize her thoughts. A knock at her door startled her. She glanced at the clock, nearly 10 p.m., too late for casual visitors. Through the peephole, she saw Mark shifting from foot to foot, his expression troubled. "Hey," she said, opening the door. "Everything okay? I thought we were meeting tomorrow for dinner." Mark stepped inside, his lanky frame tense with nervous energy. At 21, he still had the gangly look of someone not quite comfortable in his adult body. "Carlo called me. Said you got some mysterious job offer from people in suits. What's going on, Becca?" Rebecca sighed, closing the door behind him. "News travels fast. It's not mysterious, just unexpected." She gestured to the papers on the table. "I was going to tell you tomorrow." Mark scanned the documents, his engineering, student's mind quickly processing the information. The Kent Foundation, seriously? They're like major players. Dad used to talk about Edward Kent all the time. Rebecca smiled faintly at the mention of their father, who had followed business news with religious devotion. "Yeah, well, apparently they're interested in me running a community center project in the neighborhood." Mark looked up, his expression a mix of awe and confusion. How did this happen? Rebecca found herself telling the whole strange story. The homeless man who wasn't homeless, the wooden bird, the unexpected meeting. As she spoke, she realized how surreal it all sounded. When she finished, Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question Rebecca had been avoiding. "So are you going to take it?" She sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know. It's an amazing opportunity, but I don't know if I'm qualified. And there's the diner, and the diner will be fine without you," Mark interrupted gently. "And as for qualifications, Becca, you basically raised me while working 2 jobs and keeping our family from falling apart. You can handle a community center." Rebecca's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "It's different. This is bigger." Mark sat across from her, his expression unusually serious. "Remember what you used to tell me when I was scared about starting high school after everything happened? We can do hard things. You believed it then. Why not now?" Rebecca smiled despite herself. "Using my own words against me. Low blow. I learned from the best." Mark grinned, then sobered. "Seriously though, Becca, you've put your life on hold for years. For me, for everyone else. Maybe it's time you took a chance on something for yourself." Rebecca looked at her brother, seeing not the teenager she had struggled to raise, but the thoughtful young man he had become. "When did you get so wise?" "Again, learned from the best." He stood, stretching. "Think about it at least. And whatever you decide, I've got your back. Always have, always will." After Mark left, Rebecca found herself unable to sleep. She kept returning to the folder, rereading the job description, staring at photos of the abandoned community center. Around midnight, she found herself reaching for her phone and the business card Victoria had given her. Before she could second-guess herself, she typed out a text message. "This is Rebecca Morgan. I have some questions about the position if you're available to talk tomorrow." She didn't expect a response until morning, but within minutes her phone lit up with a reply. "Of course. How about coffee at 10 a.m? There's someone else I'd like you to meet." Rebecca agreed, both nervous and curious about this mysterious additional person. She finally fell asleep around 2 a.m., her dreams filled with wooden birds that transformed into buildings with open doors and welcoming lights. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a rarity for autumn in Westridge. Rebecca called Carlo to ask for the morning off, explaining that she had a meeting. The cook's gruff exterior couldn't quite hide his genuine excitement for her. "About time someone recognized what you're worth," he said. "Just don't forget us little people when you're running the show, Becca." Rebecca laughed. "As if I could ever forget the man who taught me how to make the world's most perfect pancakes." She dressed carefully in her best clothes, wishing she had something more professional to wear. The coffee shop Victoria had suggested was upscale, but not pretentious, located on the border between downtown and Rebecca's neighborhood. Neutral territory that felt symbolic somehow. Rebecca arrived early, choosing a table near the window, where she could watch for Victoria's arrival. She was surprised when, instead of Victoria Kent's elegant figure, she spotted a familiar bearded face approaching the coffee shop. James Harrington, this time dressed in clean, well-fitting clothes that looked casual but expensive, entered and scanned the room. When his gaze fell on Rebecca, he smiled, the same transformation occurring that she had witnessed in the diner. "Ms. Morgan," he said, approaching her table, "I hope you don't mind that I'm joining you and Victoria this morning." Rebecca felt oddly shy in his presence now that she knew who he really was. "Not at all, Mr. Harrington, though I do feel at a disadvantage, since you know quite a bit more about me than I do about you." James chuckled, taking the seat across from her. "Fair enough. And please, it's James. Mr. Harrington was my father, and I never quite got used to the sound of it applied to me." Up close, without the layers of disguise, Rebecca could see that James Harrington was probably in his early 50s, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested a life of expression rather than hardship. His beard was now neatly trimmed, and his hands, the same hands that had carved the wooden bird, were strong and capable looking. "I owe you an apology," he said directly. "My methods can seem deceptive, and I understand if you feel uncomfortable with how we met." Rebecca appreciated his directness. "I'm still processing it, to be honest. It's not every day you discover the homeless man you fed breakfast to is actually a wealthy philanthropist in disguise." James winced slightly. "When you put it that way, it does sound rather like a bad movie plot, but I assure you there's method to my madness." "Victoria mentioned research for community projects?" James nodded. "My brother Edward, the Edward Kent of the Foundation, is brilliant with numbers and strategy. I'm more interested in the human element of our work. I've found that people reveal their true character when they think no one important is watching." Rebecca tilted her head, studying him. "And what did you learn from watching me?" "That kindness isn't always grand gestures. Sometimes it's just a plate of eggs and a moment of dignity offered without expectation of return." His blue eyes were earnest. "Do you know how many restaurants I've been asked to leave just in Westridge? How many places where I couldn't even get through the door? And the few where I was tolerated, the service was grudging at best, as if poverty were contagious." Rebecca thought of Mr. Finch's disapproving stare, Mrs. Ellison's whispered comments. People fear what they don't understand, or what they think could happen to them. "Precisely," James said, leaning forward. "And that fear creates barriers, invisible walls between us and them. Breaking down those walls is essential to rebuilding communities." The coffee shop door opened and Victoria Kent entered, spotting them immediately. She joined them at the table, offering Rebecca a warm smile. "I see you two have reacquainted yourselves." Rebecca nodded. James was explaining his research methods. Victoria ordered coffee for all of them before turning to Rebecca. "You had questions about the position?" Rebecca had prepared a list, and for the next hour she posed practical inquiries about responsibilities, resources, timeline, and expectations. Both Victoria and James answered thoughtfully, neither oversimplifying nor overwhelming her with details. What gradually became clear was that this wasn't a token position. They were offering her real authority to shape the project, with substantial resources at her disposal, but also significant accountability for outcomes. "The foundation will provide the funding and frameworks," Victoria explained, "but you would determine priorities, build local partnerships, and make decisions about programming based on community needs." James added, "We don't want to impose solutions from outside. We want to empower someone who understands the neighborhood to create something truly responsive to what people need." As they talked, Rebecca found her initial skepticism giving way to genuine excitement. The project they described aligned perfectly with needs she had observed for years. Lack of affordable childcare, preventing parents from maintaining stable employment, seniors isolated in their apartments, teenagers with nowhere safe to gather after school. "What about my lack of formal qualifications?" she asked finally. "Won't that be a problem when dealing with city officials, potential partners, or grant requirements?" James and Victoria exchanged a glance. "That's where the foundation comes in," Victoria said. "We can provide training, mentorship, and support for the technical aspects. What we can't provide is your authentic connection to the community and your natural ability to see people clearly. Besides," James added with a wry smile, "formal credentials are often overrated. I have 3 degrees gathering dust in my office, and none of them taught me what I've learned by sitting on park benches talking to people society has forgotten." By the time they parted ways, Rebecca had a much clearer picture of what the position would entail, both its challenges and its possibilities. Victoria provided her with contact information for 2 other project directors who had come from similar non-traditional backgrounds, encouraging her to speak with them about their experiences. "Take your time," Victoria said as they prepared to leave. "This is a significant decision. We want you to be confident in your choice." James lingered as Victoria departed for another meeting. "The bird suits you," he said unexpectedly. Rebecca blinked. "The wooden bird? How do you mean?" "Bluebirds are symbols of happiness and fulfillment," James explained. "They're also remarkably resilient creatures, adapting to changing environments without losing their essential nature." He smiled. "Like someone else I've met recently." Rebecca felt herself blush. "You're giving me too much credit. I'm just doing the best I can, like everyone else." "The best we can is all any of us have to offer," James replied. "But some people's best comes with an open heart that makes the world better for everyone around them." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small business card, handwritten rather than printed. "My personal number, not the foundation's, not my assistant's. Just in case you want to talk further without all the formality." Rebecca accepted the card, strangely touched by the gesture. As James walked away, she noticed how people responded to him now, nodding respectfully, making way, some even seeking to catch his eye or exchange greetings. The same man who had been invisible yesterday was now the center of attention simply because of how he was dressed and carried himself. The contrast struck her as both sad and revealing, a visible demonstration of the invisible barriers James had spoken about. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of activity. Rebecca returned to Miller's for her afternoon shift, fielding curious questions from colleagues and regular customers who had somehow already heard rumors about her potential career change. "Is it true you're leaving us to run a foundation?" Mrs. Henderson asked when she came in for her usual afternoon tea. Rebecca laughed. "Not exactly, and I haven't made any decisions yet." Mr. Finch, surprisingly, was one of the few who didn't mention the rumors. But when Rebecca brought his usual order, he looked up from his newspaper with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That homeless fellow," he said abruptly, "the one from yesterday, wasn't what he seemed, was he?" Rebecca paused. "None of us are exactly what we seem, Mr. Finch." The banker studied her for a moment, then nodded once, almost to himself. "Well, good luck with whatever comes next, Rebecca. This place won't be the same without you." It was the closest thing to warmth she'd ever received from the taciturn man, and it affected her more than she expected. By the end of her shift, Rebecca felt mentally and emotionally exhausted. She declined Carlo's offer of dinner, wanting time alone to process everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. At home, she found another surprise waiting. A package had been delivered, a slim, rectangular box with no sender information. Inside was a book titled Community Development, Grassroots Approaches That Work, and a handwritten note that simply read, "No pressure, just thought this might be interesting reading whether you take the position or not. J." Rebecca smiled despite herself. James Harrington was proving to be as persistent in encouragement as he had been in his research methods. She made herself a cup of tea and settled on the couch with the book, intending to just skim through it. But she found herself drawn into case studies of successful community initiatives led by ordinary people who had identified needs and found creative ways to address them. One chapter profiled a former waitress in Detroit who had transformed an abandoned warehouse into a combination food co-op, education center, and small business incubator that now employed 20 people from the neighborhood. Another told the story of a retired postal worker who had created a transportation network for isolated seniors using volunteer drivers and a simple scheduling system run from his kitchen table. None of these people had started with formal qualifications or substantial resources. What they had was intimate knowledge of their community's needs and the determination to address them creatively. Rebecca found herself taking notes, ideas beginning to form for what the abandoned community center in her neighborhood could become. Almost without realizing it, she was starting to envision herself in the role Victoria and James had proposed, seeing possibilities rather than obstacles. Around midnight, her phone chimed with a text message from Mark. "So, decision made yet or still overthinking everything?" Rebecca smiled. Her brother knew her too well. "Still thinking," she texted back, "but leaning toward yes." Mark's response came immediately. "Kaun, knew it. Just remember who gets to design the cool engineering stuff for the building." Rebecca laughed out loud. Trust Mark to already be planning his contribution. His confidence in her, his immediate assumption that of course she could do this. It meant more than he probably realized. She set the book aside and walked to her window, looking out at the neighborhood she had called home for most of her life. From her fourth-floor apartment, she could see the corner where teenagers gathered without anywhere better to go, the bus stop where elderly residents waited exposed to the elements, the playground equipment so deteriorated it had been fenced off as unsafe. She had accepted these conditions as unchangeable background to daily life, focusing on smaller kindnesses within her reach rather than addressing the systemic issues. But what if she could do more? What if the position offered by the Kent Foundation was not just a job opportunity, but a chance to transform her community in lasting ways? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Rebecca had never seen herself as a leader or changemaker. She was the reliable one, the steady presence, the shoulder others leaned on, taking center stage, making big decisions, being responsible for a project of this scale. It all seemed beyond her, and yet. The wooden bluebird caught her eye, its simple form somehow conveying both delicacy and strength. James's words echoed in her mind, resilient creatures, adapting to changing environments without losing their essential nature. Rebecca took a deep breath. Maybe it was time to adapt, to expand her understanding of what she was capable of, without losing the qualities that had brought her to this unexpected crossroads. She picked up her phone and composed a new message to Victoria's number. "I'd like to accept the position if the offer still stands. When can we discuss next steps?" Then, after a moment's hesitation, she sent a second message to the number James had given her. "Thank you for the book, and for seeing something in me I hadn't recognized in myself." As she prepared for bed, Rebecca felt a curious lightness despite the magnitude of the decision she had just made. Change was coming, challenges lay ahead. But for the first time in years, she was moving towards something rather than just maintaining what she had. The wooden bluebird kept watch from her windowsill, its carved wings poised as if for flight, its smooth form a reminder that sometimes beauty emerges from unexpected places, and that kindness, once set in motion, can transform both the giver and the receiver in ways neither could have imagined. The following morning dawned with unseasonable warmth, as if the universe were offering a gentle welcome to Rebecca's new beginning. She had slept surprisingly well, waking before her alarm with a clarity and energy she hadn't felt in months. Her phone already showed responses to both her messages from the night before. Victoria's was formal but warm. "Wonderful news. Can you meet at the foundation offices at 2 p.m. to review contracts and discuss immediate next steps? We're excited to welcome you to the team." James's message was characteristically more direct. "You already had it in you. I just happened to be paying attention. Coffee at Miller's before your meeting? I'd like to hear your first impressions of the book." Rebecca smiled, typing quick affirmative responses to both. As she prepared for her final shift at the diner, she had decided to give 2 weeks' notice, but Victoria had indicated they could be flexible about her start date. She felt a strange blend of nostalgia and anticipation. Miller's Diner had been her constant during years of upheaval. Within its walls, she had found stability when everything else was uncertain. Leaving would be harder than she had initially imagined. Carlo was already at the grill when she arrived, his solid presence as much a part of the diner as the ancient coffee machine or the scuffed linoleum floor. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening in a way few people ever got to see. "So," he said. Spatula paused mid-flip. "You're really doing this thing?" Rebecca nodded, tying her apron with practiced movements that had become automatic. "Over the years. I gave my answer last night. I start officially in 2 weeks, but there will be orientation and training before then." Carlo nodded, returning his attention to the grill. "Good. About time you got to use that brain of yours for something bigger than remembering who takes their eggs over easy and who wants them scrambled." Rebecca laughed. "I'll miss you too, Carlo." The morning passed in a blur of routine tasks and quiet goodbyes to regular customers. Many expressed genuine happiness for her. Some shared concerns about who would remember their usual orders, and a few even asked if the community center would have a cafe where they could still see her occasionally. Mr. Finch arrived at his usual time, claiming his standard spot at the counter. As Rebecca placed his black coffee and wheat toast before him, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "I've been thinking," he said, not quite meeting her eye. "This community center project. It'll need financial advisors, I expect. People who understand neighborhood banking, small business loans, that sort of thing." Rebecca blinked, surprised. "I suppose it will, yes. Mr. Finch nodded, more to himself than to her. Well, when you get to that stage, if you need someone with experience. He left the offer hanging, returning his attention to his newspaper with studied casualness. Rebecca felt a rush of unexpected warmth. "I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Finch, thank you." The banker grunted acknowledgement, but Rebecca could have sworn she saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Similar moments occurred throughout the morning. Mrs. Ellison mentioned that her daughter was an occupational therapist who might be interested in offering workshops. The Henderson family wondered if the center would need volunteer reading tutors for after-school programs. Even the usually silent teenager who washed dishes on weekends asked if they'd need someone to teach basic computer skills. By the time James arrived at 11:30, Rebecca was feeling overwhelmed by the outpouring of support and interest. The community she had thought of as fragmented was revealing connections and resources she hadn't fully appreciated. James sat at the counter, accepting a cup of coffee from Carlo with a friendly nod that suggested they had already met properly. Rebecca wondered fleetingly when that had happened and what Carlo had thought about the whole situation. "You look shell-shocked," James observed as Rebecca approached. She shook her head, smiling. "Not shell-shocked, just recalibrating. Everyone wants to help with the center. People I never imagined would be interested." James's eyes crinkled with pleasure. That's how community works, when given the chance. People want to contribute, to be part of something meaningful. They just need the right invitation and structure. Rebecca leaned against the counter. "Is that what you found in your research?" "Consistently," James confirmed. "Beneath the surface fragmentation of modern life, people still hunger for connection, for the feeling that they're building something worthwhile together." He took a sip of coffee. "That's what excites me about this project. It's not just about providing services or programs. It's about creating space for a community to recognize itself again." Rebecca nodded, understanding dawning. "That's why you wanted someone local to run it. Not just for practical knowledge of the neighborhood, but because rebuilding community requires trust," James finished. "And trust is personal. It can't be imported or imposed from outside." Their conversation continued, touching on ideas from the book James had sent, possibilities for the center's focus, and practical considerations about the transition from her current role to the new one. As James prepared to leave, he hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. "One more thing," he said, placing another small wrapped object on the counter. "A companion for your bluebird." Rebecca unwrapped it to find another wooden carving. This time of a nest containing 3 tiny eggs, each smaller than her fingertip, exquisitely detailed. "The future," James said simply, "full of possibility, waiting to take shape." His smile was gentle, almost shy. "I carved it last night after receiving your message." Rebecca was touched by the gesture, by the thought of this accomplished man sitting up late, carving something, delicate and hopeful because her decision had mattered to him. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you." James nodded once, then glanced at his watch. "You should finish your shift. And I have a meeting with Edward about the budget for your project. He's eager to meet you at the foundation later." As he turned to leave, Rebecca called after him. "James, does Edward know how you found me? About your research methods?" James's laugh was full and genuine. "Oh yes, he thinks I'm completely eccentric, but he's learned to trust my judgment about people." He winked. "Even when I find them serving breakfast to apparent vagrants." The rest of Rebecca's shift passed quickly. By the time she hung up her apron and prepared to leave for her meeting at the foundation, she felt as if she was standing on a threshold between 2 worlds, the familiar comfort of the diner behind her, and ahead, a landscape of possibility. She was only beginning to comprehend. Carlo emerged from the kitchen as she was gathering her things. "Here," he said gruffly, thrusting a paper bag into her hands. "Can't have you making important decisions on an empty stomach." Rebecca peeked inside to find a sandwich and one of Carlo's rarely made cinnamon rolls that customers regularly tried and failed to order. "Thank you," she said, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. Carlo waved away her gratitude. "Just don't forget us when you're changing the world, Becca." She hugged him impulsively, feeling his initial surprise fade into a brief, fierce return embrace. "Never," she promised. "This place, all of you, you're part of whatever comes next. You know that, right?" Carlo stepped back, his expression softening. "I know, now go on, before you're late for your fancy meeting." As Rebecca left Miller's diner for what felt symbolically like the last time, though she knew she would return during her notice period, she felt both lighter and more grounded than she had in years. The wooden bird and nest nestled safely in her bag, tangible reminders of the strange, serendipitous sequence of events that had led to this moment. A simple act of kindness, offered without expectation of return, had somehow opened a door she hadn't even known existed. Rebecca took a deep breath of the autumn air, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, and set off toward the gleaming buildings of downtown where the next chapter of her story was waiting to begin. Behind her, Miller's diner continued its reliable rhythms, a sanctuary of consistency in a changing world. And somewhere in between, in the space where past and future met, where small kindnesses and big dreams intersected, a new possibility was taking shape, like a bird preparing for flight or an egg about to hatch. Not just for Rebecca Morgan, a former waitress and future community leader, but for an entire neighborhood waiting to rediscover its shared heart. 3 months had passed since Rebecca Morgan had accepted the position with the Kent Foundation. Winter had descended on Westridge, transforming the city with a crystalline beauty that belied the harsher realities faced by many of its residents. The abandoned community center, now officially named the Westridge Neighborhood Commons, was still mostly empty, but signs of rebirth were beginning to emerge from the neglected structure. Rebecca stood in what would eventually become the main activity room, her breath visible in the cold air, despite the space heaters humming valiantly in the corners. The building's heating system was one of many elements awaiting renovation, but Rebecca had insisted on moving her makeshift office into the space as soon as basic safety requirements were met. She wanted to work from the heart of the project, not from the comfortable but distant foundation headquarters downtown. Spread across a folding table were architectural plans, budget projections, and a growing collection of notes from community meetings she'd been hosting in local churches and school gymnasiums. Post-it notes covered one wall, each bearing an idea, need, or concern voiced by neighborhood residents. The colorful mosaic of paper represented hundreds of conversations, a visual map of community priorities that was guiding every decision. Rebecca was studying a contractor's estimate when the door opened, bringing a rush of even colder air. James Harrington entered, stomping snow from his boots and unwinding a scarf from around his neck. He carried 2 travel mugs and a paper bag that emitted a tempting aroma of baked goods. "You need better heating in here," he said by way of greeting, handing her one of the mugs. "Carlo says you haven't been in for breakfast all week. He's worried you're surviving on vending machine fare." Rebecca accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her chilled fingers around the warmth. "Tell Carlo I miss his pancakes, but contractor, meetings wait for no woman." She peered into the paper bag. "Are those his cinnamon rolls?" James nodded, looking pleased with himself. "I had to promise my firstborn child, but yes," he said, and I quote, "someone's got to make sure that girl doesn't waste away while saving the neighborhood." Rebecca laughed, the sound echoing in the empty space. Carlo has a unique way of showing affection. She gestured toward the plans on the table. Want to see the latest revisions? Over the past months, James had become a regular presence at the project site. While Victoria Kent handled the formal administrative aspects of Rebecca's position, James had taken on the role of unofficial mentor and sounding board. His unconventional approach to philanthropy and genuine passion for community-driven solutions aligned perfectly with Rebecca's vision for the center. "These look promising," James said, examining the updated floor plans. "I see you've expanded the childcare space and reduced the administrative offices." Rebecca nodded. After that meeting with the single parents group last week, it became clear that affordable, flexible childcare is an even bigger priority than we initially thought. Several mothers mentioned turning down job opportunities because the hours didn't align with available childcare options. James studied the plans thoughtfully. "What about the computer lab? Still on track?" "Actually, we've had an interesting development there." Rebecca pulled out a letter from beneath the stack of papers. "Mark's engineering professor read about our project in the local paper and wants to partner with us. His students will design and set up the computer lab as part of their service learning requirement. They'll also provide basic maintenance and tutoring hours for the first year." James's eyebrows rose. "That's a significant contribution. Well done." Rebecca shrugged, but couldn't hide her pride. Mark may have had something to do with planting the idea, but once the professor saw our plans and met some of the teens from the neighborhood who've been helping with cleanup days, he was fully on board. This had been the pattern over the past months. Initial skepticism giving way to genuine engagement as the project gained visibility and momentum. Small victories accumulated. A local paint store donating supplies for interior rooms, a furniture company offering slightly damaged but perfectly functional office equipment, retired teachers volunteering to develop after-school programs. "Speaking of partners," James said, pulling out his phone, "I've been meaning to show you this." He scrolled through his photos and handed her the device. The screen showed Mr. Finch, the banker who had been so dismissive of the homeless man, in Miller's diner, standing in a classroom with a group of teenagers. The usually stern man was gesturing animatedly at a whiteboard covered with basic financial concepts. "Is that—" Rebecca began, surprised. James nodded, looking pleased. "He approached me after one of your community meetings. Said he'd been thinking about retirement but wasn't ready for complete uselessness, as he put it. He's developing a financial literacy program for the center. That was his pilot session at the high school last week." Rebecca stared at the photo, still processing this unexpected development. "Mr. Finch, who would have thought?" People surprise you when given the chance," James said softly. "Sometimes they even surprise themselves." Rebecca handed back the phone, her mind turning to the dozens of similar transformations she'd witnessed since beginning this work. Mrs. Ellison, once so quick to judge, now organizing a coat drive for the center's clothing exchange program. The Henderson family hosting fundraising dinners in their home. Even Carlo, despite his gruff exterior, had been teaching weekend cooking classes for teenagers in the diner's kitchen during off hours. "It's happening faster than I expected," Rebecca admitted. "The engagement, I mean. I thought we'd face more resistance." James considered this as he sipped his coffee. People hunger for connection more than they realize. When given a meaningful way to contribute, many will step forward. He gestured toward the post-it covered wall. "You've given them ownership. That's the difference." Rebecca nodded, thinking about the community design sessions she'd insisted on holding despite Victoria's concerns about extending the planning timeline. Rather than presenting a fully formed vision, Rebecca had started with open-ended questions. What do you need? What would make your life better? What skills do you have to share? The answers had shaped every aspect of the project, sometimes in unexpected ways. The planned senior center had evolved to include intergenerational programming after elderly residents expressed feeling isolated from younger community members. The job training focus had expanded to include small business incubation, when several unemployed residents revealed entrepreneurial ambitions but lacked resources to launch their ideas. "We still have challenges," Rebecca said, moving toward the window. Outside, the snow continued to fall, softening the edges of the neglected playground that would eventually become a community garden and outdoor gathering space. Funding for ongoing programs, staff recruitment, building trust with groups who've been promised change before and seen nothing delivered. James joined her at the window. "True, but you're addressing those challenges differently than most would. You're not promising quick fixes or imposing solutions. You're building capacity within the community to solve its own problems." Rebecca smiled wryly. "That sounds very noble when you put it that way. Most days I feel like I'm just trying to keep track of 100 moving pieces without dropping any of them." "That's leadership," James said simply, "holding the space where others can contribute their best." Before Rebecca could respond, the door opened again, bringing another blast of cold air and the sound of laughter. Mark entered, accompanied by several other young people carrying toolboxes and measuring equipment. "The cavalry has arrived," Mark announced, his face flushed with cold and excitement. "We're here to map out the computer lab and assess the electrical needs. Professor Nguyen sent preliminary designs for the layout." Rebecca introduced James to the students, watching with pride as her brother smoothly took charge of explaining the project vision to his peers. Mark had blossomed over the past months, finding unexpected synergy between his engineering studies and the community center's practical needs. What had begun as brotherly support had evolved into genuine passion for using his technical skills to create social impact. As the students dispersed throughout the building, taking measurements and notes, Mark lingered to speak with Rebecca privately. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his expression concerned. "You look tired." Rebecca waved away his worry. "I'm fine, just busy. There's so much happening, and I want to make sure we get it right." Mark frowned. "You said the same thing when you were working double shifts at the diner and taking night classes. Remember how that ended?" Rebecca winced, recalling the pneumonia that had laid her flat for 3 weeks during Mark's junior year of high school. "This is different. I'm passionate about this work. It energizes me." "Passion isn't a substitute for rest," Mark insisted. "Even superheroes take breaks." James, who had been discreetly examining architectural details nearby, rejoined them. "Your brother makes an excellent point. Sustainable change requires sustainable practices." He gave Rebecca a pointed look, "including self-care for those leading the change." Rebecca felt a flash of irritation at being ganged up on, but it faded quickly. They were right, and she knew it. The past 3 months had been exhilarating, but exhausting. She'd been so focused on proving herself worthy of the Foundation's faith in her that she'd barely taken time to process all that was happening. "Fine," she conceded. "I'll take a real day off this weekend. No emails, no contractor calls, no community meetings." Mark and James exchanged skeptical glances. "We'll believe it when we see it," Mark said, then headed off to join his classmates, calling over his shoulder, "Dinner at my place Sunday. No excuses." Left alone with James again, Rebecca shook her head ruefully. "When did my little brother start parenting me?" "Around the same time you started transforming an entire community," James replied. "Growth rarely happens in isolation. When you stretch yourself, you create space for others to do the same." He glanced at his watch and sighed reluctantly. "I have to go. Board meeting at the Foundation. Edward wants updates on all current projects." He hesitated, then added, Speaking of which, Victoria mentioned that you haven't been submitting your full hours on your timesheets. Rebecca busied herself with organizing papers. There's been some evening and weekend work. It didn't seem worth documenting every hour. James's expression grew serious. Rebecca, your work has value. All of it. When you underreport your time, you're not just shortchanging yourself. You're creating unrealistic expectations for what this kind of transformation requires. He touched her arm gently. The foundation didn't hire you with the expectation that you donate half your working hours. Rebecca nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. I'll be more accurate going forward. After James left, Rebecca found herself alone in the cavernous space, surrounded by evidence of progress and the greater work still to come. She walked slowly around the room, trying to envision what it would look like in 6 months, a year, 5 years. Children playing in safe spaces, teenagers finding mentorship and purpose, seniors sharing wisdom and finding community, families accessing resources to build stability and opportunity. The vision was compelling, worth every exhausting hour. But Mark and James were right. She couldn't sustain this pace indefinitely. And truthfully, she didn't need to. The project had developed its own momentum, with community members stepping forward to take ownership of various aspects. Her role was increasingly becoming one of coordination and support, rather than carrying the entire weight herself. Rebecca picked up her phone and dialed the local salon, booking the haircut she'd been postponing for months. Then she texted Mark. Sunday dinner sounds great. I'll bring dessert. And yes, I'll actually take tomorrow off. As she prepared to leave for the day, Rebecca's gaze fell on the wooden bluebird sitting on her makeshift desk. She had brought it from her apartment on her first day working in the building, a talisman of sorts, a reminder of how this all began. Beside it now sat the nest with its tiny carved eggs, symbols of possibility and growth. She picked up the bird, running her finger along its smooth back. Sometimes the simplest acts had the most profound consequences. A cup of coffee offered, without judgment. A meal shared without expectation. A space created where people could rediscover their connections to one another. Rebecca carefully packed the carvings in her bag before turning off the space heaters and locking up the building. Outside, the snow had stopped, and the setting sun cast long blue shadows across the untouched white expanse of the future garden. The cold air filled her lungs, sharp and clarifying. Tomorrow she would rest, and then she would continue the work of helping this community rediscover its heart, one connection at a time. The next morning, Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window, a rare luxury after months of pre-dawn alarms. She stretched luxuriously, savoring the unusual sensation of having nowhere to be and nothing urgent to accomplish. Her apartment was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock in the kitchen. The plumbing had finally been fixed, eliminating the persistent drip that had been her constant companion for so long. She made coffee and carried it to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street below. Saturday morning rhythms played out, children building snowmen in the small park across the street, an elderly couple carefully navigating the cleared sidewalk, the local bakery owner setting out, an open sign with a flourish. Rebecca realized with surprise that she hadn't really seen her own neighborhood in weeks, despite all her focus on community development. She had been so busy working on future improvements that she'd stopped noticing the life already flowing around her. After breakfast, she bundled up and ventured out without any particular destination in mind. The air was crisp but not bitter, the kind of winter day that invigorated rather than punished. Rebecca walked slowly, reacquainting herself with familiar streets and discovering small changes that had occurred while she was immersed in her work. A new mural brightened the side of the convenience store at the corner. The vacant storefront that had housed a defunct video rental place now showed signs of renovation, with a hand-painted sign promising community bookshop opening spring. The bus shelter where elderly residents often waited had been equipped with a new bench, apparently a recent addition. Life continued to unfold, with or without her direct involvement. The realization was both humbling and liberating. Rebecca's wanderings eventually led her to Miller's Diner. She hadn't planned to visit, but the familiar red awning drew her like a beacon. Inside, Saturday morning chaos reigned. Every booth full, Carlo shouting orders from the kitchen, servers navigating the narrow spaces between tables with practiced skill. She slipped onto an empty stool at the counter, content to observe without announcing her presence. The rhythms of the diner were so familiar she could predict them, the precise timing between when orders were called and plates appeared, the choreography of coffee refills and check deliveries, the steady hum of conversation punctuated by Carlo's occasional bark of laughter from the kitchen. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," came a gruff voice beside her. Carlo had emerged from the kitchen, his apron bearing evidence of the morning rush. "Decided to remember where you came from, huh?" Rebecca smiled. "Just needed a decent cup of coffee. The stuff I make at home never tastes the same." Carlo snorted, but his eyes were warm as he poured her a cup without being asked. "That's because yours doesn't have 40 years of seasoning in the pot." He studied her for a moment. "You look better, still too skinny, but not like you're about to collapse." "Thanks, I think," Rebecca laughed. "James delivered your message and your cinnamon rolls." Carlo nodded approvingly. "Good man, that one. Doesn't put on airs despite having more money than God." He leaned against the counter, lowering his aged voice. "So how's it really going over there? All these community meetings and planning sessions. Is anything actually happening?" Rebecca sipped her coffee, considering the question. "Slower than I'd like in some ways, faster in others. The building renovations won't be complete until spring, but the programs are already taking shape. Your cooking classes have been a huge hit, by the way." Carlo waved away the compliment, but Rebecca could see he was pleased. The weekend classes he'd started for neighborhood teenagers had quickly become one of the most popular pre-opening activities, with a waiting list that grew weekly. "Those kids just need someone to show them the basics," he said gruffly. "Nothing special about it." "You're teaching them more than cooking," Rebecca countered. "You're showing them they matter enough for someone to invest time in them. That's everything." Carlo mumbled something inaudible and retreated to the kitchen, uncomfortable as always with explicit recognition of his gentler side. Rebecca smiled into her coffee, familiar with his pattern of gruffness, followed by even more generous actions. She was about to leave when the bell above the door chimed, and a familiar figure entered. Mrs. Ellison, wrapped in her expensive cashmere coat, designer handbag hanging from her arm. The woman who had once whispered loudly about standards when a homeless man entered the diner now headed the clothing exchange program at the community center, collecting donations of professional attire for job seekers. Mrs. Ellison spotted Rebecca immediately and made her way to the counter. "Rebecca, what perfect timing. I've been meaning to call you." She settled onto the neighboring stool without waiting for an invitation. "The winter clothing drive exceeded all our projections. We've received so many donations that we need additional storage space before the center is ready." Rebecca shifted mentally from her day off to problem-solving mode. "The basement at First Presbyterian might work. Pastor Williams offered space during the renovation phase." Mrs. Ellison nodded briskly. "Excellent. I'll coordinate with him directly." She paused, studying Rebecca with unexpected perceptiveness. "You're supposed to be taking the day off, aren't you? Victoria mentioned it at the Foundation volunteer orientation yesterday." Rebecca sighed. "I am off, technically. Just stopped in for coffee." Mrs. Ellison's perfectly manicured hand patted Rebecca's arm. "Learning to delegate is the hardest part of leadership, dear. Believe me, I know. Her expression softened slightly. 20 years running the hospital auxiliary taught me that the hard way. Take it from someone who burned out twice. The work will still be there tomorrow, but your health might not be if you don't pace yourself. The advice from this unexpected source struck Rebecca more forcefully than similar warnings from Mark or James had. Mrs. Ellison had always seemed like the embodiment of efficient organization, her volunteer activities run with military precision. The admission of past burnout revealed a more complex picture. "I'm trying," Rebecca said honestly. "It's just, there's so much happening, and I want to make sure it all goes right." "Of course you do," Mrs. Ellison replied. "But consider this. By doing everything yourself, you're denying others the opportunity to contribute meaningfully." She stood, smoothing her coat. "I'll handle the storage situation. Enjoy your day off, Rebecca. That's an order." With a crisp nod, she departed, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and the stronger impression of unexpected wisdom. Rebecca finished her coffee thoughtfully. Mrs. Ellison had articulated something she hadn't fully recognized. Her reluctance to delegate stemmed partly from a desire to protect the project, but also from a habit of self-reliance so deeply ingrained she barely noticed it anymore. For years, Rebecca had been the one who held everything together. After her parents' deaths, through Mark's tumultuous teenage years, during the financial struggles that had nearly cost them their home, carrying responsibility alone had become her default mode, a pattern she had unconsciously transferred to her work at the community center. But this project was different. Its very purpose was to create shared ownership and collective action. By trying to control every aspect, she was undermining her own vision for community-led transformation. The realization was uncomfortable, but clarifying. As Rebecca paid for her coffee and prepared to truly embrace her day off, she felt a shift in her understanding of what her role should be. Not the sole driver of change, but the creator of space where many could contribute to a shared vision. The remainder of her day unfolded without plans or purpose, a luxury she hadn't allowed herself in months. She browsed the small bookstore near her apartment, purchasing a novel that had nothing to do with community development or social change. She treated herself to lunch at a cafe she'd been wanting to try, lingering over dessert without checking her watch or email. In the afternoon, she visited the local art museum's free exhibition, losing herself in colorful canvases and thought-provoking installations. One piece particularly captured her attention, a mixed-media work titled Community that featured hundreds of small photographs arranged in a spiral pattern. From a distance, the individual images blended to create a larger picture of hands clasped together. The artist's statement beside the work read, "We are each a pixel in the greater image of humanity. Alone, we are simply a point of color. Together, we create meaning." Rebecca stood before the piece for a long time, seeing in its visual metaphor a reflection of what she was trying to accomplish at the Westridge neighborhood commons. The center wasn't just about providing services or programs. It was about helping people recognize their connections to one another, about transforming individual struggles into collective strength. By the time she returned to her apartment that evening, Rebecca felt refreshed in a way she hadn't experienced since accepting the position with the Kent Foundation. The day's absence from work-related thoughts had created space for broader perspective, for remembering why she had been drawn to this project in the first place. She prepared a simple dinner and was just sitting down to eat when her phone chimed with a text message. Hesitating only briefly, she checked the screen, half expecting a work emergency despite her request for a day of disconnection. Instead, she found a message from James. "Hope you're enjoying your day off. Just wanted to share some good news. Edward approved the expanded budget for the youth programs. No need to respond. See you Monday." Rebecca smiled, appreciating both the positive update and the explicit permission not to engage further today. She set her phone aside and returned to her meal, making a mental note to properly thank James for his consistent support and subtle guidance. As evening settled over the city, Rebecca found herself drawn to the window where the wooden bluebird and nest still maintained their vigil. She picked them up, holding the delicate carvings in her palm, marveling at how objects so small could carry such significant meaning. The bluebird represented the unexpected beginning, a connection formed through simple kindness, a moment that had altered the trajectory of her life. The nest symbolized what was being built, not just a physical space, but a container for growth and possibility for nurturing what was yet to come. Together, they told a story still unfolding, a reminder that transformation often began in the smallest of ways. A cup of coffee offered without judgment, a moment of dignity preserved, a connection made across social boundaries. Rebecca carefully returned the carvings to the windowsill, where the last light of day caressed their smooth surfaces. Tomorrow, she would return to the work of community building, to contractor meetings and program planning and budget discussions. But she would carry with her this renewed perspective, that her most important contribution might not be what she personally accomplished, but the space she created for others to contribute their gifts. Outside her window, lights began to illuminate windows across the neighborhood, each representing lives connected by proximity, but often separated by circumstance or misconception. The community center would become a place where those connections could be recognized and strengthened, where individual lights could join to illuminate something larger than themselves. Rebecca Morgan, once a waitress who had offered breakfast to a man she believed to be homeless, now stood at the center of an expanding circle of connection and possibility. Not because she possessed extraordinary skills or resources, but because she had recognized the extraordinary potential in ordinary human kindness, and that recognition, once awakened, was proving to be contagious. The following evening, Rebecca navigated the familiar walk to Mark's apartment building, balancing a bakery box containing an apple pie, his favorite, and mentally rehearsing the speech she had been preparing all day. Her brother needed to hear her gratitude, not just for his practical support with the community center project, but for his unwavering belief in her abilities even when she doubted herself. Mark's apartment was on the third floor of a recently renovated building that had once been a warehouse. The conversion into living spaces had preserved many original features: exposed brick walls, industrial windows, high ceilings, while adding modern comforts. The place suited Mark perfectly, reflecting his appreciation for both engineering precision and creative adaptation. He opened the door before she could knock, as if he'd been watching for her arrival. "Right on time," he grinned, relieving her of the pie box. "And you actually took a day off. I'm impressed." The apartment smelled deliciously of garlic and herbs, evidence of Mark's growing culinary skills. Music played softly in the background, one of their father's favorite jazz albums, a detail that didn't escape Rebecca's notice. "I made lasagna," Mark announced, leading her toward the open kitchen area. "From scratch, even the pasta. Professor Chen's mom taught a bunch of us last weekend. Said we needed survival skills beyond ramen and microwave burritos." Rebecca laughed, slipping off her coat. "She's not wrong. Remember when you tried to subsist on nothing but peanut butter sandwiches your entire sophomore year?" "Hey, it's a perfect food," Mark protested. "Protein, fat, carbs, all the major food groups." The easy banter continued as Mark served dinner, the familiar rhythms of their relationship providing a comfortable backdrop to the meal. They talked about his classes, her work at the center, the upcoming renovations to his engineering department, funded by, of all things, a grant from the Kent Foundation. "Did you have something to do with that?" Mark asked suspiciously as he served second helpings of lasagna. Rebecca shook her head. "Pure coincidence. though James did mention that Edward has been looking to support more STEM education initiatives, especially ones with community service components. Mark nodded thoughtfully. It's a good program. The service learning requirement is changing how a lot of students think about engineering. Less focus on just building cool stuff, more consideration of social impact and accessibility. He grinned suddenly. Sound like anyone you know? Rebecca rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smiling. Engineering for social good. Dad would have loved that concept. He would have loved what you're doing too, Mark said, his expression growing serious. Both of them would be so proud, Becca. The simple statement touched a deep chord in Rebecca. Their parents had been ordinary people. Her father, a high school science teacher, her mother, a pediatric nurse. But they had instilled in their children a profound sense of responsibility toward others. Service wasn't something special or extraordinary. In their worldview, it was simply what one did as part of a community. I've been thinking about them a lot lately, Rebecca admitted, wondering what advice they'd give about the center, about balancing all the competing priorities. Mark considered this as he cleared their plates. Mom would tell you to trust your instincts. Dad would probably make some nerdy analogy about ecosystems and interdependence. His smile was soft with memory. But mostly, I think they'd just be amazed at what you've accomplished already, not just with the center, but with your life, with our lives. Rebecca felt her throat tighten with emotion. I had help. You were never as difficult as I pretended. You were. Oh, I was definitely difficult, Mark laughed, cutting slices of pie. But you never gave up on me, even when I was doing my best to push you away. He handed her a plate, his expression turning earnest. That's what makes you good at what you're doing now, Becca. You see people's potential, even when they can't see it themselves. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they enjoyed dessert, but Mark's words lingered in Rebecca's mind. She had never thought of her stubborn belief in her brother as a leadership quality, but perhaps that persistence, that refusal to give up on someone despite challenges, was indeed a strength she brought to her current role. After dinner, they settled on Mark's couch with cups of coffee, the comfortable silence of long companionship enveloping them. Rebecca realized this was the first time in months they had spent an evening together without discussion of the community center dominating the conversation. It felt both strange and necessary, a reminder that their relationship existed independent of her work. I need to thank you, Rebecca said finally, setting down her cup. Not just for dinner, but for everything. For supporting this crazy career change, for contributing your skills to the project, for always believing I could do this even when I wasn't sure. Mark shrugged, embarrassed by her earnestness. That's what family does. No, Rebecca insisted. It's more than that. You've been my rock through all of this, pushing me when I needed pushing, but also reminding me to take care of myself. She took a deep breath. I couldn't do any of this without you. Mark looked away, blinking rapidly. You would have found a way. You always do. He cleared his throat. But I'm glad I get to be part of it. It feels like, I don't know, like we're continuing something Mom and Dad started, using whatever gifts we have to make things a little better where we are. The simple articulation of what had been an unspoken family value struck Rebecca deeply. That was indeed the thread that connected their parents' lives of quiet service to her work at the community center, and Mark's growing interest in engineering for social good. Not grand ambitions to change the world, but a steady commitment to improving what was within their reach. As Rebecca prepared to leave later that evening, Mark handed her a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. Almost forgot. This is for you, or really, for the center. Curious, Rebecca unwrapped it to find a beautiful wooden sign carved with the words, Westridge neighborhood commons, and an intricate design of intertwining branches forming a protective circle around the text. "James helped," Mark admitted. "I had the idea, but he did most of the actual carving. Said to tell you it's your housewarming gift for when the renovations are complete." Rebecca traced the letters with her finger, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and what it represented. A physical manifestation of the growing network of relationships forming around the center, connections stretching beyond its walls even before they were fully renovated. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you, both of you." The walk home through quiet streets gave Rebecca time to reflect on all that had transpired since that morning in Miller's diner when she had offered breakfast to a supposedly homeless man. The simple act of kindness had started a ripple effect she could never have anticipated, changing not just her own life, but creating expanding circles of impact throughout the community. Mr. Finch developing financial literacy programs, Mrs. Ellison coordinating the clothing exchange, Carlo teaching cooking classes, Mark connecting engineering students to community needs, dozens of others finding ways to contribute their skills and resources to a shared vision of a more connected neighborhood. And at the center of these expanding circles, quietly facilitating but not controlling, was James Harrington, a man who had deliberately made himself invisible in order to see more clearly, who had recognized in a waitress's simple kindness the potential for broader transformation. Rebecca thought of the wooden bluebird and nest waiting on her windowsill, tangible reminders of how seemingly small interactions could carry profound significance. The bird had been James's first gift to her, but she realized now that his greater gift had been recognition, seeing her potential and creating the opportunity for her to see it herself. As she reached her apartment building, Rebecca made a decision. She would call James tomorrow and invite him to coffee, not to discuss the community center or foundation business, but simply to express her gratitude and perhaps begin to know him better as a person rather than primarily as a mentor or advisor. The thought brought a smile to her face as she climbed the stairs to her apartment. Whatever came next in this unexpected journey, she was beginning to understand that its greatest value lay not just in the programs or services being developed, but in the web of human connections being strengthened and expanded, one simple interaction at a time. Spring arrived in Westridge with a gentle persistence, coaxing crocuses through thawing earth and painting bare branches with the first soft green of renewal. The transformation outside mirrored the one taking place within. The walls of the Westridge neighborhood commons, where renovation had entered its final phase. 1 year had passed since Rebecca Morgan had served breakfast to a stranger in Miller's diner. 1 year of challenges and triumphs, of doubts overcome, and possibilities embraced. The grand opening of the community center was scheduled for the following weekend. Colorful banners announcing the event hung from lampposts throughout the neighborhood. Local newspapers had run feature stories about the transformation of the abandoned building into a vibrant hub of activity. Even businesses that had initially been skeptical were now involved, offering donations and services to support the center's programs. Rebecca stood in the main hall, now bright with fresh paint and natural light streaming through cleaned windows. The wooden sign Mark and James had created hung proudly above the entryway, its intricate carving catching the morning light. Chairs were arranged in neat rows for the final planning meeting, representatives from every aspect of the project gathering to review last-minute details. As people filed in, Mr. Finch with his financial literacy program materials, Mrs. Ellison coordinating the volunteer ushers, Carlo grumbling good-naturedly about catering logistics, Rebecca felt a sense of wonder at how far they had all come together. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" said a familiar voice beside her. Rebecca turned to find James Harrington, hands in his pockets, surveying the room with quiet satisfaction. Over the past year, Their professional relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship, their regular coffee meetings shifting from project discussions to deeper conversations about community, purpose, and occasionally more personal matters. "Sometimes I can't believe it's real," Rebecca admitted, "that we actually made it happen." "That you made it happen," James corrected gently, "with a little help from your friends." Rebecca smiled, acknowledging the truth in his words. She had learned to accept credit for her leadership while still recognizing the collective effort that had brought the center to life. It was a balance she had struggled to find initially, but one that now felt natural. "Edward sends his regrets for missing today's meeting," James continued. "Board obligations in the city, but he'll be here for the opening, of course." The foundation couldn't be more pleased with how the project has developed. Rebecca nodded, having come to understand the different but complementary roles the Kent brothers played. Edward's strategic vision and financial stewardship creating the framework that allowed James's more personal, relationship-based approach to flourish. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Rebecca said, lowering her voice slightly. "Why did you choose Miller's Diner that day? Of all the places in the city where you could have conducted your research?" James's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Ah, was that coincidence or design? Perhaps a bit of both." He gazed thoughtfully around the room. "Miller's has always been a neighborhood landmark, a place where community already existed, however imperfectly. I was curious about how that community would respond to an outsider, especially one who appeared to need help rather than offer it in." Rebecca considered this. "So you were testing us?" "Observing," James corrected. "Testing implies pass or fail. I was simply watching for connections, who saw whom, who helped whom, who created barriers or built bridges." His expression grew more serious. "When I saw how you treated me with dignity, without expectation of return, I recognized something essential for the kind of project we wanted to create." Before Rebecca could respond, Victoria Kent approached, tablet in hand. "Ready to start the meeting?" she asked. "We have quite an agenda to cover before opening day." The meeting proceeded efficiently, each committee reporting on final preparations. What struck Rebecca most was how naturally community members had stepped into leadership roles, Mrs. Henderson coordinating the children's reading program, Mr. Finch overseeing the financial education workshops, Mark and his fellow engineering students putting final touches on the computer lab. These were no longer her projects that others helped with. They were community initiatives that people had genuinely embraced as their own. Her role had evolved into that of connector and facilitator rather than director. Exactly the transformation she had hoped for but hadn't been sure was possible. After the meeting dispersed, Rebecca found herself alone in the main hall with James. He seemed contemplative, studying the space with a slight smile. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "About transformations," he replied. "Not just of buildings, but of people." He gestured around them. "When we first discussed this project, it was about creating a space where community could happen. But what I've watched over the past year is community creating itself, with the space simply providing the opportunity." Rebecca nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The center is just a container, the connections between people, that's the real project. Precisely. James turned to face her directly, "Which brings me to something I've been wanting to discuss with you. The foundation is considering similar projects in other neighborhoods, using this model of community-led development rather than imposed solutions." Rebecca felt a flicker of anticipation. "That's wonderful. I'm happy to share what we've learned here." "I was hoping for more than that, actually." James reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. "This is a formal offer from the Kent Foundation. We'd like you to head a new division focused on neighborhood revitalization projects across the city. You would train and mentor other community leaders, help select neighborhoods for investment, and shape the foundation's approach based on what you've accomplished here. Rebecca stared at the envelope, momentarily speechless. I don't know what to say. You don't have to answer immediately, James assured her. The position would begin after the Westridge Commons has its first anniversary, giving you time to ensure a smooth transition here with community members fully taking the reins. Rebecca took the envelope, her mind racing with possibilities. A year ago, she would have immediately doubted her qualifications for such a role. Now, she recognized that her experience at Westridge had given her precisely the expertise needed to guide similar transformations elsewhere. I'll think about it, she promised, though I have to admit, the idea of helping other neighborhoods experience what's happened here is compelling. James smiled warmly. I thought it might be. Once you've seen what's possible, it's hard not to want to create more possibilities. Later that afternoon, Rebecca found herself drawn back to Miller's Diner. The place where everything had begun felt like the right setting to process this new opportunity. Carlo spotted her the moment she entered, waving her to the counter, with his usual gruff affection. Shouldn't you be at that fancy center of yours? Opening day's almost here. Rebecca smiled, sliding onto a stool. Everything's under control, needed a moment to think. Carlo studied her face, his years of reading customers serving him well. Something's up. Good news or bad? Good, I think. The foundation has offered me a new position, overseeing similar projects in other neighborhoods. Carlo nodded slowly. So you'd be leaving Westridge? Not entirely. I'd still live here and the Commons would be part of my portfolio. But yes, I'd be working with other communities too. Carlo poured her coffee without being asked, then leaned against the counter. You know what I think? I think that's exactly what should happen. You've got a gift, Becca, not just for organizing things, but for seeing what people need and helping them see it too. He gestured around the diner. Look what's happened, just because you served breakfast to a guy everyone else wanted to ignore. Rebecca sipped her coffee, recognizing the truth in Carlo's assessment. The ripples from that simple act had expanded, beyond anything she could have imagined, not because of any special talent on her part, but because kindness created openings for connection that might otherwise remain closed. I think I'm going to accept, she said finally. Carlo nodded approvingly. Good, just don't forget where you came from and expect me to complain when you miss your regular breakfast order. Rebecca laughed, feeling a sense of certainty settle over her. Some things never change. After finishing her coffee, Rebecca decided to walk by the community garden that had replaced the neglected playground behind the center. The spring planting had just been completed, neat rows of seedlings promising summer harvests for neighborhood families. She found Mark there, kneeling beside a raised bed, explaining something about irrigation systems to a group of interested teenagers. Seeing her, he waved her over. Perfect timing. Tell these guys about the community kitchen plans for harvest time. Rebecca joined the circle, describing how produce from the garden would supply cooking classes, community meals, and a small farmer's market. The teenagers listened with genuine interest, some already volunteering for summer maintenance shifts. After they dispersed, Mark dusted soil from his knees. You look like you've made a decision about something. Rebecca smiled at her brother's perceptiveness. The foundation offered me a new position, working with other neighborhoods to create projects like this one. Mark's face lit up. That's perfect for you. When do you start? Not until after the Commons' first anniversary. There's still plenty to do here first. Mark nodded thoughtfully. But you're going to take it, right? I think so. Yes. He threw an arm around her shoulders. Good. The world needs more of whatever magic you've been working here. As evening approached, Rebecca made her way to her apartment, passing neighbors who greeted her by name. No longer just faces she recognized from waiting tables, but people with whom she had built relationships, whose stories she knew, whose gifts she had witnessed emerge through community involvement. In her apartment, she went directly to the windowsill where the wooden bluebird and nest still kept their vigil. She picked them up, these tangible reminders of how her journey had begun. The third carving had joined them months ago, a small bluebird in flight, its wings outstretched, capturing the moment of launch. James had given it to her the day the center's renovation began, saying simply, "For what comes next?" Now she understood more fully what he had meant. The possibilities that had been nurtured in the nest were ready to take flight, to spread beyond the boundaries of one neighborhood, one community center. Rebecca placed the carvings back carefully, their smooth surfaces warm from the evening sunlight. Tomorrow would bring the final preparations for the grand opening, the celebration of all they had accomplished together, the official beginning of the Westridge neighborhood commons. But today, in this quiet moment, Rebecca Morgan, once a waitress who had offered simple kindness to a stranger, recognized that an ending was also a beginning. That kindness, once set in motion, created endless possibilities for transformation. And that the most important journey wasn't from one place to another, but from disconnection to community, from isolation to belonging. Outside her window, lights began to illuminate the neighborhood as evening deepened. Each light represented a story, a life, a potential connection. The work of bringing those lights together would never be complete, but now she understood. That was precisely what made it worth doing. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.